Good evening, residents of Everett, Washington. I would like to call to order the Everett City Council meeting of November 2nd, 2022, and welcome everyone to City Council chambers. The City Council is conducting our weekly council meeting hybrid. This will allow us to reach members of our community who wish to participate via Zoom or those who wish to attend in person. It is our hope to continue this format to be as accessible as possible to our community. For those who wish to participate in the future via Zoom, you may find the public comment registration form on the City of Everett website under the City Council Department. Click on the register here to provide comment via Zoom link, and you'll come to a form that you need to fill out. After you submit it, you'll receive an email confirmation with the Zoom link and the phone number to the meeting, and participants must submit this form at least 30 minutes prior to the meeting. If it's submitted after that time, you will not receive a Zoom link or number to speak via Zoom, but you may still participate the day of the meeting by coming to the council chambers in person. Please note, we do not allow comments on any kind of campaigning, whether for or against ballot measures or candidates running for office. We also do not accept comments focused on personal matters that are unrelated to city business. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Mayor Franklin.
Here.
Councilmember Tui.
Excused?
Councilmember Ryan.
Here.
Councilmember Vogely.
Here.
Councilmember Zarlingo.
Here.
Councilmember Fossey. Here. Councilmember Schwab.
Here.
President Stonecipher.
Here. Councilmember Ryan, will you please lead us in the flag salute?
Absolutely.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Councilmember Schwab, would you please read the land acknowledgement this evening?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. The City Council wishes to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Hochstohooks people, and their successors, the Tulalip tribes. Since time immemorial, they have hunted, fished, gathered on, and taken care of these lands and waters. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. We will strive to be honest about our past mistakes and bring about a future that includes their people, stories, and voices to form a more just and equitable society.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion for the approval of the minutes of October 26, 2022?
Councilmember Ryan so moves.
Thank you.
Vogely seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Ryan.
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely.
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo.
Yes.
Councilmember Fossey.
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab.
Abstain.
President Stonecipher.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor Franklin.
Good evening. I have no comments, only that it's November already, and I can't believe that, so no comments this evening.
Thank you. Angie, do we have anyone signed up to speak for public comment this evening?
Hello, President Stonecipher. We have one person in chambers here to speak, so I'll call on Mary to come to the podium. So just a reminder to state your full name and city of residence, and you have 3 minutes to speak. Is the left button not working? There we go.
It did not. Mary Rollins. I'm from Everett, District 2. I'm here probably for the last time on this subject, but we'll see. I am talking about Everett redistricting. You were all given one of these last week, and those of you that were absent were hopefully given a copy. And I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for listening, for being present to what was said. And I really hope to hear today some kind of resolution for what we brought forward. The next step, which is in this process for citizens, is to go to court, which nobody wants to do that. I don't want to do that. And I don't really have time to do that or the money to do that. And I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to do that. So I hope that came across clearly, that I don't want to do that. But something has to be done for the information that we set forward. So I'm just hoping, in gratitude, that that's going to happen tonight. And I really appreciate all of you being here. I'm grateful for this city that has embraced me for the last 11 years. I'm really grateful to be here. There's so much that I love about this city. And I know that it's hard because this was our very first redistricting. And there's bound to be issues and problems and glitches that come up. But we want to make sure in the future this is a bug, not a feature of this process, that some things will come up that need to be revisited. And that we bake in time, as I said last time, to look at those situations. So anyway, thank you so much for your time and what you give to the city, and I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. President Stonecipher, that's all we have.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask David Hall if you would please comment a little bit on legal department's review of the materials that we received from the resident last weekend.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that.
Briefly.
I
Because
know
we
that,
have heard this, and we do hear you, and we have looked at.
and the legal department has also heard this and looked at it very carefully. I guess first, I know some council members last week had questions about the November 1 deadline established in the charter for adopting the commission's map and how that might be affected if there was additional process required after November 1. And that really should not be a concern for 3 reasons. First, and I guess obviously, council met their November 1 deadline by adopting a map. Second, that charter provision establishing that deadline doesn't include anything that would prevent further process if that were to be required, which is highly unlikely for the reasons I'll talk about in a few minutes. Third, as a practical matter, it just doesn't have any substantive effect because there aren't any elections based on districts until 2025. So we have a little bit of time to do anything that needs to be done after November 1. It's not going to affect any elections. With regard to the submittal, I believe by Ms. Townsell on behalf of Everett Districts Now, identifying some of their process concerns, I've reviewed that in quite a bit of detail, and I appreciate the evaluation. Obviously, a lot of work went into that, but I don't see anything in that that affects the validity of council's approval of the map. Some of the concerns appear to be based on a misperception of what the charter requires. For example, the allegation that there was not a citywide meeting as required by charter because it was labeled an at-large meeting rather than city-large meeting. There just isn't any magic language in the charter that says what it should be called. There are in some other situations. You know, for example, enacting an ordinance, the charter is very specific. It says you must use the words, now therefore the city of Everett does ordain, right? But with regard to what these meetings have to be called, there just isn't any specific language that has to be used. And it's pretty clear that the meeting that was called an at-large meeting was the city-large meeting that's required by the charter. Other concerns that were raised kind of fall under the category of suggestions for how the process might have made information more accessible to the public. None of those, and I've looked at that very carefully, none of those rise to the level that would affect the validity of council's approval of the map. I think that if Everett Districts Now has suggestions for how the process could be approved in the future, they should submit those, and those can be considered in the future processes. But the fact that Everett Districts Now would have done the process differently does not in any way affect the validity of the process. The process was done according to charter, and it doesn't affect the council's approval of the map. The last issue was the question of the location of the meeting for the district, for District 1. The charter provides that there shall be a meeting in each of the 5 districts. And the meeting for District 1 was held at the Everett Public Library. And that location is 100 yards or so outside of the boundary of District 1. I understand the reasoning of the district and commission was that they had looked at the proposed map from the new districts. The districting master had adjusted the boundaries slightly based on changes in demographics from a couple years ago. And the library was within the boundary of what he proposed as the new district. Their interpretation might differ from what mine might have been, but it was, understandable and reasonable. But I think more importantly, it didn't make any difference in either public participation or the outcome of the process. It's unlikely that there were individuals who would have attended had it been held 100 yards farther to the east or wherever it would have been. and that would have changed the final map. We've looked carefully at this. We haven't seen anything. And again, I do appreciate the work that's been done by the EDN people, but we haven't seen anything that would invalidate the council's action approving the map or that should cause the council to want additional process in this matter.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that kind of ad hoc.
Oh, and I should mention on this last issue of the location, that is the one issue that we're going to do some more work on this week. And if there's anything we find in our kind of deep research on this issue that would change our initial conclusion, I will come back to you next week and let you know.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. We are going to move on to council comments and liaison reports, starting with Councilmember Ryan.
Great, good evening, folks. Thanks for being here tonight. One of the takeaways that I see from, and have been hearing from the folks that have been sharing about the redistricting process, is just the importance of reaching out to the community early, utilizing already formed groups that are informed and have a stake, and like neighborhood associations and local organizations that are active, and just reaching out early in the process to gather input so that the final product is reflective of what the community members are putting in and the information that they're providing early in the process. And I think that sometimes going to the public when there's a near final draft makes it difficult to influence the final product, because there's already a lot of buy-in and a lot of heartstrings attached to what's already been drafted, so there's not a lot of room for input, because there's a lot of pride that's on the line to not allow for input. So my biggest takeaway from what I've been hearing is just how critical it is to engage the public early and truly listen to the feedback that's given. I could think ahead to the Everett Transit merger, the proposal that might be coming up early in the year, and I'm worried that it might fall into that same trap of coming to council as like a almost fully baked plan, and there hasn't been room for community input, the comp plan, past zoning changes and whatnot. So my biggest takeaway from what I've been hearing is just how critical it is to reach out to the public early and make sure that their voices are heard and incorporated into the final product. So I wanted to thank Everett Districts now for taking your time to come here for the last 2 meetings and being engaged in the process, and I definitely hear you as well, so thank you. For my council comments, this weekend I attended the Downtown Everett Association trick-or-treating with my little Buzz Lightyear and Mega Jaguar, and we just had an absolute blast, and it was a really big event, definitely bigger than the last few years, so congratulations to everybody involved, and what a great partnership the city has with the Downtown Everett Association to help put that on. I want to give a reminder that boards and commission applications are due November 4th. Is that Friday? Math. So if you know anybody that's looking for ways to get engaged with the city on a bigger level, please encourage them to apply to be a board or commission member so that they can be involved. I was glad to see on today's agenda consent item number 6 for the water filtration site, and just wanted to reiterate my interest in touring the site. I think it's a really critical piece of the city and a function that we provide, and so I'd like to just make another mention that I would like to tour the site at some point, so I'd love to have folks from administration reach out. It's definitely not urgent by any means. Maybe we'll wait till spring when it's a little bit springier out there, but I just want to put that out there. Also wanted to mention that November 5th marks the 106th anniversary of the Everett Massacre, the bloodiest battle in Pacific Northwest labor history. And Historic Everett is hosting a documentary film on November 5th at 1 p.m. at the Everett Elks Club, made by a local filmmaker that highlights what happened and what has happened since, and the investigation into the matter, and just what the outcomes were from that awful piece of our, dark piece of our labor history. So just wanted to make a mention of that. And then wanted to close with bear with me during a commentary that I'd like to share. So my spouse was unavailable tonight to watch our children at home, and luckily we were privileged enough to be able to hire childcare to watch our kids tonight, but I had a moment of panic earlier of like, what if she can't make it? Then I won't be able to join the council meeting tonight, even though I've prepared comments and studiously reviewed the agenda and whatnot. And so Then thinking ahead to a couple of weeks from now, I'll be at the National League of Cities in Kansas City, Missouri, serving the city and the people of the residents of Everett in a different capacity, using my voice and the stories that I hear from the people in Everett to influence policy changes at the federal level that will hopefully trickle their way down to Everett. And at that same meeting is going to be the big budget presentation, and I'm not going to be able to participate in that, which is really frustrating because I would be more than happy to join in at a council meeting at 8:30 p.m. my time in Kansas City to do my job and to participate in budget discussions. And then, unfortunately, staff's going to have to answer my 83 questions via email in those coming days after the meeting. So I would really, really like to see a reconsideration of our council procedures to allow for in extraneous situations to allow council members to join remotely so that we can participate in council meetings. And I can acknowledge that there would be a need to maybe put limitations on it or by approval only, but I just wanted to add that as my commentary for the evening tonight, that I would love to see that reconsidered and maybe even before our council retreat in January. Thank you.
I'll just say we will reconsider that, but we do have an annual retreat where we consider our council procedures. We did have that discussion less than a year ago, I guess it was in March, and the council decided that we would not do that, but we will reconsider it when we, obviously we'll look at everything. I don't want to reconsider individual pieces of that until we have an opportunity to sit down and look at the entire council procedures at one fell swoop. As you know, I asked Angie to send out some dates in January that people will be available so we can get something on the calendar and get a facilitator ready to help us with that. So that is coming up. Councilmember Vogely.
Okay, lots of stuff. On the way into the building tonight, I noticed the Cocoon House sign by the bus stop, and I can't remember if I've mentioned it before, and it's probably not in our jurisdiction. However, if I don't say it out loud, I might never get it out there. It doesn't have an area code with the phone number. So maybe somebody should call, somebody, I know, somebody doesn't exist, but call the number, because who knows. Anyways, that's the Cocoon House. Help for Youth needs an area code on the number sign. I've written my notes on this today. I got it in my Public Works bill, and I think Glynis might be here somewhere. Remember to renew your pet licenses, everybody, and I know that most people here have to pay a water bill, so they'll get this in the mail. Look for it. And I was able to be at that commission meeting for the first time, finally. It's been a year since I've been on the committee, and as the liaison. And so I'm just thankful that I was finally able to meet everybody and talk a little bit about what, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your last name, or I'd call you that, but Glynis has brought forward to us about the changing of the code and whatnot. I would like to see if reconsidering the council procedures to meet remotely, although we did that within the past year, I haven't read it like today, so I'm wondering if it's necessary to have our council retreat all in person, or if people are needing to meet remotely, that might be acceptable, so that we make sure that every one of us can be at that council retreat. I will wait to hear more about that. I just want to make sure everybody gets to be there. And I was really happy to hear regarding Everett District's redistricting that we don't have any votes set up for until 2025, and so there is time to reconsider the issues that are at hand. I did not bring my copy with me, So I don't have it right in front of me, obviously. And I wholeheartedly disagree that this is not an issue. I think it is an issue. From what I remember, and you pointed out clearly where the meeting was held, whether it's District 1 or 100 yards away. And assuming that, more people wouldn't show up because of 100 yards. I don't think we can assume that, because you know what assuming makes of you and me. And considering all of the screenshots of the inaccurate website links, etc., while I think I can understand the reading between the lines of there's nothing that they gave to us that would make it so that our voting for the map would be an issue, like, yes, what was brought forward to us, we're allowed to vote on it, give our stamp of approval. But in regards to, the process and how the information was gotten, I think that is the issue. And I don't know how, but I would possibly even want to rescind it and redo it so that there is accurate information put forward towards the community at large, because that is not what appeared to happen. I see your finger, and I'm willing to listen to what you have to say, if that's my last thing, unless we have conversation.
If it's okay, just a couple
Yes,
of comments. First, I should clarify that when I mentioned that there aren't any district-based elections till 2025, I wasn't intending to imply that that means we can change our decision anytime until 2025, just that we shouldn't worry about the November 1 date, because if anything had to happen in the next few weeks or months, it's not going to affect any elections. And as you heard me explain, I don't believe anything should happen in the next few
Right.
weeks or months. But as you spoke, it also reminded me of a couple of things I should have mentioned when I talked about the location of the library. One, library is a pretty convenient location, even though it's slightly outside the current district boundaries, and that may explain why that meeting was more heavily attended than any other district meeting. It's more heavily attended than any meeting other than the at-large citywide meeting, and the person who made that objection to the location actually did attend that meeting, so she obviously was not prejudiced by the location.
Okay. Thank you for that, and that's what I have for this evening.
Thank you. Council members Arlingo.
Well, just one item. I'd like to thank Councilmember Vogely, the chair of the Parks and Quality of Life Committee, and Bob Leonard, Kimberly Moore, and Corey Rettenmeyer for pulling together a meeting on an updated ordinance about recreational water use activities. This largely pertains to Silver Lake and Thornton Sullivan Park on the lake. The existing ordinance really needed updating because of changes in use by the community members, changes in staffing, resources, changing in law, and actually even technology, if you've seen the proliferation of paddle boards and now even electric hydrofoils on our waters. Importantly here, the committee has some work yet to do and discussion to do to best accommodate the park and lake use by all the folks in Everett who come to the 3 lakefront parks around that sole lakefront, or that lake we have inside the city, and also to the exceptional users such as the boat races that bring Everett visitors from around the region. An additional and really welcome factor is the ADA compliant trail around Silver Lake, spearheaded by Mayor Franklin. That's now under construction, and this will make this century-old Everett amenity accessible to some who found it really difficult before. It's also encouraging many of us, I can speak from personal experience, to get out and walk to improve both physical and mental condition. That's a great combination of both parks and quality of life. So thanks to the city, to the mayor, to Councilmember Vogely, to Bob Leonard and team for making this happen. It's wonderful to see this stuff go forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Fossey.
I didn't have any council comments initially, but now I do. So I was able to attend the DEA trick-or-treating downtown, and we had an absolute blast. There were so many cute kiddos in so many different costumes, and it was just really well done, and my kids had such a fun time. So well done on putting that on. It was great. As for the districting, I have an intense amount of respect for our legal team, and I appreciate you coming forward on the spot with bringing kind of feedback on that. I think I had brought up previously that I wanted to have a meeting to talk about potential changes, but I don't quite recall what that is. That still on your radar as far as happening?
I recall you suggesting that you would like to have a meeting, and I'm available anytime to talk to you.
All right. So if our guests have anything that they would like to contribute, question, answer-wise for that, would love to hear it. Thank you for reminding me of it. I do agree much with what Councilmember Ryan had spoken about, and this was a grievance of mine in the initial districting process about the outreach and the listening to the voices of the community. And being on council now, we are kind of removed from the process for good reason. And so having to stay out of it keeps us from having the kind of eyes on what's happening, what's going on. And it pains me to hear that that was still an issue. And with that perpetually being a problem, I do think that that needs to be addressed, if anything, for the next time around, so that we don't have these same mistakes, and that we are listening to the community. We do have adequate outreach, or at least that it is perceived and felt that we had adequate outreach, because when that doesn't happen, that creates a distrust that is not a good relationship for government to have with the community. So thank you, Councilmember Ryan, for your words on that. As far as the procedures discussion, is there any possibility in the way that things are set up that we can amend it for that situation where Councilmember Ryan is going to be out on council business, available, just not able to access the meeting? Are we able to make a motion or a movement just to amend it for that particular day? Because I know Councilmember Ryan is going to have a lot of questions, and I do not think it would do her community the service without having her voice here, since it is a situation where she's there for council business, but she wants to be present in the council. Can we make an exception for the November 15th meeting? Is there any process to be able to do that?
Well, I will kick it over to our legal support here, but we did consider all of those eventualities when we took up the procedures the first time, and so I'm not sure that the vote would be any different, but certainly, Mr. Hall, what would you say about our procedures?
As you said, that was discussed and decided, and that may be the practical answer, but as a legal matter, the procedures were adopted by resolution, not by ordinance, and the council can at any time vote to do something that differs from the resolution. So if you wanted to make an exception, that is legally acceptable.
So could I just make a motion now? Is that possible?
I'll second it. And then we can take a vote, because as per our charter, if somebody calls for a vote, it shall happen.
I think if we were going to do that, I'd rather put it on the agenda so the members of the public would know that we were taking up this matter, and we could put it on for next week.
And, Council President, one point of clarification for the public is the budget ordinance has 3 readings, and so November 16th is the reading where our finance director goes through fund by fund. There are 2 more readings, November 30th, and then third and final reading is scheduled for December 7th. And so I do think
there are additional opportunities, I know we talked about this earlier, than just the 16th, although I agree that that's the meeting where Susie goes through fund by fund, so it's a detailed meeting.
Thank you. So I'm hearing that we have 2 council members that would like to take up the matter of procedures next week, so I would ask them to work with Mr.
Can I do
Hall.
it this week?
No, we do not take up business
Okay.
from the dais. We generally
We
like to.
can, though. I'm looking up I'm sorry to be obnoxious, but it's quite possible, because I have been looking at our charter, and when a member calls for a vote, it shall happen, and the clerk shall write down the yays and the nays. Maybe we won't get what we want, that's fine, but it's a quick vote, bam, yes, no.
Mr. Hall, please weigh in on this.
Well, I think unfortunately that's kind of a gray area. The council can take action on matters that are not on the agenda, which means from the dais. The procedures also state that the placement of matters on the agenda, and therefore placement of matters that come up for a vote, is within the discretion of the council president. So I would recommend that we stick with that practice we've always had, which is also consistent with the procedures that you all have adopted. I think if push came to shove, you could make an argument that Councilmember Vogely is right, that it can be forced at the moment, and I would hate to give a legal opinion right now on which position is right, but our practice has always been that the council president can set the agenda and determine when matters come up for a vote.
Thank you.
That, I think, is my only comments tonight, with the exception of a reminder that when that vote was taken regarding the specific amendment about allowing for remote access, the 3 council members that were in opposition and overruled at that time were the only council members that had young children and that barrier in place. So for accessibility options, just a reminder.
Councilmember Schwab.
Yes, I would just ask the council members, talk with respect and dignity and do not make personal attacks. Thank you.
I called myself obnoxious.
I have no further comments. Do we have an administrative update this evening?
No update tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Hall, any regular business for us to deal with?
No
this
regular
evening?
business, and there is no executive session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion for the 6 consent items.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes.
Councilmember Zarlingo?
Yes.
Councilmember Fosse?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab?
Yes.
President Stonecipher?
Yes. We have 3 proposed action items. Items 7, 8, and 9 are all first readings, so I'll read each one into the record. Item 7, Council Bill 2211-46, first reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special construction project entitled Comeback Building Police Property Room Relocation. Fund 342, Program 035, to accumulate design costs for the project. Third and final reading will be on November 16th of this year, 2022. Item 8 is Council Bill 2211-47, also first reading. Adopt an ordinance to create a special construction project entitled Downtown Public Restrooms, Fund 342, Program 037, to accumulate all costs for the project. And item 9, Council Bill 2211-48, its first reading. Adopt an ordinance creating a special construction project entitled Fire Training Center Project, Fund 342, Program 036, to accumulate design costs for the project. The third and final reading will be on November 16th as well. Do we have any questions on any of the proposed action items? Seeing none, we'll move on to our action agenda. Item 10 is Council Bill 2210-43, third reading. Approve an ordinance relating to animal control, amending EMC Chapter 6.04 and 6.08.025. Do I hear a motion?
Move to pass Council Bill 2210-43.
Thank you. Second?
Councilmember Ryan seconds.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions or do we have
Can I
any-
move to table?
I'm going to take questions and comments from council members first, and then we can entertain a motion, because that cuts off all conversation. Do any other council members have questions or comments on item 10? Okay, I will entertain a motion to table.
I would like to make a motion to table, and I can explain.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you.
I spoke with them today. There was some changes on there that they're checking with legal about, and so they were a late kind of notice. So not an error at all on the staff, but there are going to be some additional amendments and changes to it, and so they'll have to come back with that because it was not early enough in the process for them to make the updates. So, yeah.
I have a question.
I think we have staff here, so I'd like to, is it okay if we, that might answer any questions that just came up.
Oh, okay, the right button, okay. Glennis Frederickson, Animal Services. I talked with Councilmember Fossey this afternoon, and she did identify a couple of typos, just some numbering errors, I think, that nobody else had missed or had found. And then there were a couple questions just in terms of some legal issues that she raised that I said I would need to check with our legal department on, so.
Thank you. So Mr. Hall, would this come back then, where we have a motion to table, would it come back if there are substantive changes, would they just come back as amendments that we would then incorporate into our motion at the time?
They would come back as suggestions, which a council member then would make a motion to amend to include those suggestions. I'm not sure what the particulars are, but I know Flora Diaz of our department has been working with animal control, and they would provide specific language for you to amend with.
Okay, all right. Is it significant enough? Should we postpone it for a week? I don't want to put it on the 16th agenda because we already have a packed agenda that.
And again, because I've not been involved with this, Flora Diaz has been involved, I don't know how significant they are.
Okay, I'll check with administration. Okay, we have a motion and a second to table for at least 1 week. Any other questions or comments or discussion about the motion to table? Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Ryan?
Yes.
Councilmember Vogely?
Yes?
Councilmember Zarlingo?
I'm going to abstain. I don't know enough yet.
Councilmember Fossey?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwab?
Yes.
President Stonecipher?
Yes. We will go to our council briefing agenda. These items come before the city council serving as a council committee of the whole and are likely to be scheduled at a future meeting. Item 11, Everett Police Department Study Final Report. Good evening, Chief. Chief Templeman is here.
Good evening, Mayor Franklin and Council President Stonecipher, Council Members Dan Templeman with the Police Department. And tonight, we have Richard Brady here with Matrix Consulting. He's the president and founder of Matrix. He's been our project manager as well through this entire process. This is a process that began about a year ago. Initially started under a previous council, and Council President Stonecipher was involved in the RFP process that started this. And as part of the whole process, 3 briefings to council were required. We've had a briefing to the full council in April of this year, another briefing by Matrix in September to the Public Safety Committee, and tonight is the final report that you've all been provided a copy of, and Mr. Brady will be presenting a high-level overview of the recommendations and some of his findings. He's going to focus primarily on staffing and scheduling, because he's previously briefed council on a lot of the other aspects, but he will cover some of those other recommendations as well as part of his briefing this evening. So I'd like to present Mr. Brady, and as I do this, I also want to recognize Lieutenant Kevin Fairchild, who's here, who has been our project manager in Liaison to Matrix for the last year on this project. And so in addition to his regular duties that he's responsible for within the police department, he's also picked up this special project, and it's been a tremendous amount of work, and I'm very much appreciative of his efforts and the work that he's done on this project, so thank you. And so I'll now present Mr. Brady. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to present from here because I need to operate this thing. And I need to do this as well. Thank you. Mayor Franklin and Council President Stone Cipher and the others on the City Council. I am Richard Brady. I'm the president of Matrix Consulting Group, but I'm still a working consultant, and I was your lead consultant on this project here. We have worked with you and your police department for the past year, getting facts, interviewing people, and analyzing the information that we've had to come up with this final report that we have finally put together for you that incorporates the management and policy and training and those types of things that we briefed you on a couple of months ago with what was the core of the study, looking at staffing, deployment, and alternatives to staffing. So let me just brief you quickly on what brings us up to this date here. So again, as I said last time, we briefed you on the management systems within the police department. But the scope, of course, included the staffing needs from the perspectives of the number of staff you need to handle the workloads, but also to look at alternative strategies for handling certain types of work, especially in the field, but in every aspect of police operations. We have a number of recommendations within the report. And some of those can be dealt with relatively quickly. Certainly, many of the management things that we discussed last time, many of them don't require money. Many of them just require staff time to develop policies, training programs, and things like that. But many of the staffing things may take some time because there's a collective bargaining process involved. There are budgetary processes involved in implementing many of those. Some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term. So the staffing analysis, it's really taken us a year to get to this point. There's much data that you can see in the report. I think there are probably more numbers in the report than there are words. And it took some time to deal with all of that. We used 2021 as our base year. Recent years have been kind of odd to analyze anything in government operations, and especially in police services. So we went in the past. 2020 was not a very good year. 2019 was relatively normal. So we did look at trend data, but 2021 was recent, and we were able to look in depth at information, especially from the computer-aided dispatch system and the records management systems, to report much of what we use to understand, especially field services, but other aspects as well. But there's much data that we use to look at investigative services and other functions within the police department. That was all important. We went through an extensive validation process as part of this, certainly within our project team, but also within the police department to make sure that our understanding of the department and its operations and services to the community was correct. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about patrol. It's the largest part of the department, obviously. It's the most visible, and it has, in many respects, the most impact in terms of community perceptions of safety and addressing problems that occur that people report, or recurring problems that need some kind of emphasis. The notion of proactivity is very important in the way we evaluate law enforcement operations. We look at field services and their workflows in two different ways. There are the reactive things that they deal with, which are mostly responses to requests for service, either calling 911 or some other way of contacting the police department. And there's an important facet of looking at those kind of workloads, because how many officers are deployed, how they're deployed, makes them available to make response times consistent with what the community expects, especially for higher priority calls. But in order to look at how effective a police department is in terms of supporting the community, in terms of the problems that people need to work with the police department in partnership, in order for police officers to be engaged, the proactive workloads are very important to look at. And with departments that don't have proactive time, the partnerships and the community engagement often suffers, and the longer-term problems aren't dealt with. So we look at how much proactive time officers have in the field and what they use it for as the core measure of effectiveness of the police department. In our work, we've targeted areas of about 40 to 45% of total time available for patrol officers to be proactive. At levels less than that, it happens in such small increments of time that it can't be used very effectively to talk to the community, to solve problems with them, to go offline for a half an hour even, or an hour, to be able to meet with community groups or to investigate a problem proactively in the field. At those kind of levels, you have that time, patrol officers have that time to be able to work in that way with the community. So in looking at your workload, this graph here, there's a lot of numbers here. It shows by day of week and by hour of day in sort of a heat map kind of a way, how calls are occurred. The green are hours of the day in which there aren't many calls for service, and the yellow, orange, and red represents time when calls start to increase. This is the kind of graph we see in just about every department we work with, that calls increase in the morning, and they continue that way until into the early to mid-evening hours. So you're not unique in that regard at all. Clearly, people need help when they're awake. People cause problems when they're awake, and most people are needing help or creating problems during the times when most people are awake during the daytime hours. However, when you look at the impacts of that workload in consideration of the number of people who have been deployed in the last year, there is the first conclusion we came up with when in looking at field services, and that at current staffing levels, and recognizing that they're down a number of positions because of position vacancies, that current staffing levels do not provide the proactive time in that 40 to 45% level. Overall, it's not too bad. We work with departments that are much lower than 31%. But in the key hours of the day, between 10 o'clock in the morning and 10 o'clock in the evening, it falls to close to zero, single digits, teen kind of digits. And what this means is that officers are going from call to call. It means that they're stacking calls when a new shift comes on. There are calls that are being held over from the previous shift, and community engagement suffers. So there are very few time blocks in those daytime hours or early evening hours when they meet the 40 to 45%. And so as a result, looking at the 31% proactivity on an overall basis is really kind of meaningless, because it really only exists at times when there aren't many calls at all. There are a number of contributing factors to this. Clearly, vacancies have been a big factor in this. Currently, it's been in the high teens for most of the last year in terms of patrol, and that has a big impact. The 12-hour shift is also a factor, because in a 3-shift system, you can stagger staff for variations in workload, which you really can't do when you've got end-to-end 12-hour shifts. Yes?
This is probably very obvious, but current staffing levels means the amount of patrol officers that we have right now, not the
Correct.
amount that we have budgeted.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes?
And just so I'm clear, these graphs are from analysis of staffing levels in 2021?
Correct.
For the base year, and from January 1 to December 31, or is there like a smaller?
No, January 1 to December 31st of
Thank you.
2021. Then that way we had a whole year for seasonality purposes. So in continuing the story about patrol, the first question is, can you redeploy staff to better equalize workloads, to better address that issue during the daytime? So we looked at an alternative in which 4 police officers were redeployed from the night shift to the day shift. That would have to be negotiated, but it's something that many communities look at, even communities with 12-hour shifts. It does have an impact if you were to do that, but not very great. because it's the same number of people, it's the same 31%. And there is some very modest improvement during those daytime and early evening hours. It goes from the low teens per hour to the high teens, or maybe to the low 20 percentage points in terms of availability of proactive time. But it's still very, very low in terms of the things that police officers need to accomplish to be engaged with the community. Yes?
The proactive time before occurred, sorry, the proactive time before occurred, sort of middle of the night kinds of times more than others. Did you get feedback from the officers about the usefulness of proactive time in the middle of the night? I mean, were there community relations that could be worked on at that time, or was?
Certainly, but the community is largely asleep, so they're mostly doing it on their own. And there is a value to that. But in many of the nighttime hours in a police department, especially one that has a 12-hour shift, you are staffing for officer safety. Calls when they occur may be serious, even more serious at times. And so the need for backup is greater. So you can't just say, we'll staff just the workload and move 15 officers from the night shift to the day shift, because you have to be concerned about that. But redeploying 4 officers would not have that impact. But it doesn't achieve what you want to achieve in terms of better equalizing workload and providing the ability for officers assigned to the day shift to be involved, and in early hours of the night shift, to be involved with the community and solving problems in partnership with them. So the next step in the story is to look at what happens as you fill vacancies in the police department. And as you know, the police department has been very aggressive and utilizing some new methods to attract new officers as well as lateral officers to the police department. And over time, that will have very dramatic effects. As you go from the current number of 72 officers to the 90 positions that you are authorized, including the officers on the COPS grant, you can see that 31 percentile overall increases to 45%, which is at the top of that optimum range that we're targeting here. And what this does is what this chart does, and the analysis in the report documents, is that it proportionally allocates officers as they are allocated now. So with that, you still have a gap in the evening hours from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. It's better than it was before, but while every other time block and every other day gets officers proactive time at 40% or greater, it's still only in the 20 percentile range. And that's a really important time. People are coming home from work, finding potentially that their house was burglarized. Other things are happening at that time. So that's the reason why proactivity is low, because calls are very high at that time. So it does a better job, but not an ideal job. So the last thing we looked at is that as you added people, what if you created what's called a power shift, an overlapping or cover shift that isn't operating from 6 to 6, or the way you are deploying officers right now, and that we take 14 officers, 7 in 2 teams, so you got 7 days coverage, and deploy them in a 12-hour shift from 10 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. And you can see that, and a couple of those 14 new people would be sergeants as well, so that you didn't have an excessive span of control. So you can see that this provides an all-green chart. Visually, it really tells the story here that officers throughout the day, every day of the week, is able to provide an effective level of coverage, respond to calls effectively, and be engaged with the community solving problems. This kind of staffing would also be very attractive, I think, to attract new officers to the department as well. So that was the analysis of patrol, and as you add staff, it provides a very powerful alternative view. We also looked at other field services as well, including the COET and the contact teams that you have. So right now, as you know, you have 2 teams that operate with police officers and embedded social workers that are working to respond to crisis mental health calls and other kinds of crisis calls, various kinds of homeless issues, and dealing proactively with businesses and the community in a variety of kinds of ways. The issue with your co-ed use right now is that it's limited during the week. So we took that same kind of heat map of hours of the day and days of the week and took the calls that co-ed contact teams have been responding to and showed that on this graph. The square that you see in the middle shows the days of the week and the hours of the day that the two co-ed contact teams are deployed right now. And as you can see, it does a pretty good job of covering the hours and days of greatest need, but not all of it. And certainly not the weekends, and certainly not the evening hours. So we are recommending that you create a third contact co-ed team to provide that weekend coverage and some alternative hours as well. And the advantage is, as you know, in having this alternative service, it enhances potential for crisis de-escalation on certain types of calls, even though most officers are trained in crisis intervention. Having the specialized teams goes a long way to de-escalate further. It increases the connection to programs and services that are available to them and allows more casework rather than just responding in an enforcement kind of way. As a result, it reduces pressure on the justice system because it's not just you're responding to these kind of calls in a non-traditional law enforcement way, but they're diverted in ways outside of the justice system. Also reduces pressure on the healthcare system because you're not dealing with people in need just in an emergency response kind of way. And it's a more cost-effective way of dealing with it. Incarcerating individuals with mental health problems is the most expensive way of dealing with these problems, besides not being a very effective way in general of dealing with people who have non-justice kinds of problems. So that creating a third contact team would consist of two police officers and an embedded social worker, community outreach specialist. So we looked at other field functions as well. While it is important to ensure that field patrol personnel have the proactive time that we just described to be involved with the community, even in those last couple of charts that are largely or entirely green, their ability to work in a focused, time-consuming kind of way with the community is still going to be very limited. The department has assigned administrative sergeants, one north and one south, to be liaisons with the community, to work with community groups, to answer questions from the business community, to be a funnel or a focal point for redirecting patrol personnel to certain types of problems. But they have a lot of duties. One of them, in fact, over the past year has largely been devoted to doing background investigations. But they have a wide variety of administrative assignments as well, therefore their names. So we've recommended that even though they are more devoted to that community liaison kind of function, that their time is going to be limited, and that if you created two new positions who acted, one north and one south, to be full-time community liaison officers or specialists working with community groups and then partnership on solving certain kind of problems, being a funnel for information and problem solving to patrol, you could go a long way to meeting the needs of the community as expressed to us, as you know, in the community group meetings that we held as part of the study. I think that this is one of the more important recommendations in this report. It's something that a lot of departments do, actually, and you should have comfort in that. Moving on to other field functions, there are a variety of functions, the bike units, the anti-crime unit, and the gang unit, that exist largely on paper and because of staffing shortages have not been fully functional. As you start to add staffing, get closer to the authorized levels that you have, The bike unit will provide a valuable function as fully staffed, not just in downtown, but especially in downtown for certain kinds of problems. And the crime and gang units will be valuable because there's been a spike in violent crime this year, which doesn't really show in our the data because we were mostly looking at 2021. But certainly the data that we've seen in 2022 supports that. Some of it has been gang-oriented or the kind of activity that a focused, entirely proactive unit, such as anti-crime and gang units, could help address, and same with the bike units. Lastly, adding another school resources officer is important because of the number of schools you have, because of the size of the schools, and the fact that they're not just there to respond to calls and to be immediately there, but to work, as important as that is today, but also to work with parents, students, and faculty and administrative staff.
Question.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had evaluated our response to domestic violence incidents.
Yes.
As far as, including advocacy or an advocate.
Yes.
Do you have a comment?
No, well, you're doing a good job in doing that. You've got a variety of means of getting people into different kinds of services. So it's not just police officers responding, but you are also evaluating the threat assessments associated with certain kinds of domestic violence to get them channeled in different kinds of things. You're doing the emerging best practices associated with domestic violence.
Thank you.
In spite of what I'm about ready to say, that made, yes? Oh, I talked about the anti-crime and gang units when I was talking about bike units in terms of largely proactive kinds of units in the city that for much of the last year or so have functioned more on paper than they have as real units. Anti-crime and gang units have really, with reduced staff, has functioned as one unit in the past year,
Great.
even though there could be different focuses.
Thanks.
So we, as an introduction to the investigative analysis that we did, we looked at major crime in Everett, and the numbers here are the statistics that are reported by every agency of the United States to the FBI. It's called the Uniform Crime Report. It's only 7 crimes, but they're the most serious crimes that occur in society. They are the most serious violent crimes. They are major property crimes in terms of dollar loss and things like that. So it's a proxy for crime in general, and it's collected in a standardized way. So it's helpful to look at that. And it shows that violent crime and major property crime have been overall relatively unchanged over the last 5 years through last year. But what this doesn't show is that violent crime has increased somewhat this year. And also that clearance rates, that is to say, solving cases that are given to investigators, compare favorably to national averages for both violent crime and to property crime. So your investigators, even though there have been some staffing issues there as well, that they've been effective in clearing cases and solving cases that have been given to them. What we did in our investigative analysis is that we have developed over the years time and activity standards for the various types of things that investigators do. And there are different kinds of times and different kinds of activities, whether you're a burglary detective or a major crimes detective or solving homicides and cases like that. And we applied that against your caseloads here. And overall, it shows that when you look at the cases that they're investigating, you factor in something for future growth, and the fact that, especially in property crimes, that some crimes aren't being followed up on or followed up on very effectively because of the caseload. So they are screening some cases out because the solvability factors aren't there. And so some cases that maybe if you had more investigative time to work them, there could be more solvability. It's difficult to do that. detectives, especially detective unit supervisors, have many collateral responsibilities, which take them away from some of their activities. So basically what we're saying, though, is that if you can get them to authorized staffing levels, and there are some issues there in some of the units, you've got the right number of detectives authorized, given everything I've just said about that. But there are some other opportunities here to reshape activities in the Investigations Bureau. One is for computer forensic investigations, is increasingly many agencies are civilianizing those, especially as it relates to cell phone downloads and some of the forensics involved with computers and handhelds and other types of things like that, that trained civilians are doing across the United States. And so we're not saying that's an immediate thing, but as position vacancies come in, to consider replacing those with civilians. The body-worn camera redactions, move those activities to the Public Disclosures Unit, something else which is increasingly done throughout the country, rather than having sworn personnel doing that as well. So that while you'll see in our recommendations that results in additional positions, additional civilians, it does move people over into fill vacancies in the sworn ranks as well. By adding another crime analyst, you could better support this proactive time that needs to be directed on patrol officers, but also be more responsive to the community for purposes of crime analysis needs that they may have. Yes?
Do you have a sense of the availability, the hireability of some of those civilian positions versus the difficulties we have in hiring for sworn positions?
Yeah, well, it's difficult, but not as difficult as police officers, is the experience of other agencies. So it ultimately it gets at what your pay structure is going to be and how you structure the job and things like that. But civilian paraprofessionals in a supported environment where they're trained and have a valuable job to perform has been successful in many agencies around the country, including in the state of Washington. In the administrative and support areas, we were mostly looking at backlogs that occur in some of the units, like especially in records and public disclosure, but also in property and evidence. Some of those are going to take additional staff to do. We've recommended one in a record specialist in the record units. There'll be a need to add a position in public disclosure, especially since we are recommending that additional work be transferred over to them. Utilize light duty positions to work off the backlog of disposable items in property and evidence, things that can be destroyed, returned to the owner, sold, a wide variety of things. And you can't just keep adding to those things in the property room or you'll need a lot more space. In the administrative services area, prioritizing the filling of the administrative services sergeant is a high priority. There are a number of civilianized functions that report to that position, and that should be done. And longer term, replacing the information technology MPO, the master police officer, handling those things with an IT professional is desirable. That's not to say anything about the skills and what that MPO has provided to the department in terms of creating and maintaining a wide variety of systems. But when that person retires, there will be a lot of institutional memory and ability lost, and it would be difficult to transfer that to another sworn police officer. Meanwhile, as we all know, in this state, in this country, there are many, many, many information technology professionals, including in a public service and public safety environment that can work with you in managing those informational technology needs. In parking enforcement, there will be a need to provide coverage, not just downtown, but elsewhere where there are parking issues around the city, and adding another parking enforcement officer would take care of that. In all, we've recommended 9 new positions within the department. 5 of those are in operations. The 2 in co-ed, the SRO, and what were the other ones? Oh, right, the 2 community liaisons, thank you, from the crowd. And that's the 5, and then the non-sworn make up the rest and that you can see here. So that's it for the staffing. Would you like me to recap the management things, or we're good from what we ran through last time?
If you would recap the management piece, that would be great.
Okay. So just at a high level, there's a lot of positives here, either in terms of what the Everett Police Department has in place or what they are working on to make sure that you are more at the forefront of policies, training, and accountability. There's been a lot of change around the country, but especially in the state of Washington, that is still ongoing in terms of things that have an impact on law enforcement operations, certainly as that relates to use of force and things like that. Everett's critical incident policies conform to best and emerging practices in Washington and around the country. And they have been and are continuing to look at policies as that relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion impacts in their work and in their behaviors with the community. And so that's very positive. While there are many things in their how they handle complaints and employee discipline that meet best or emerging practices, we've made some recommendations to go further in terms of changing the way people can access the police department through the website, update certain policies that don't suspend or inactivate investigations when an employee retires or resigns, even though that's current practice, make it in policy. Certain policies are using words that are not appropriate anymore, like citizen rather than community member. I think one of the most important ones is to implement what's called a discipline matrix. It's a way to, as best as possible, create consistency and accountability for administrative problems and other problems that come up within a police department, so that it is seen that for a certain kind of administrative violation that there is a range of discipline that can have, and there's a consistent way of doing that rather than being arbitrary. That's not to say that it's arbitrary now, but a disciplinary matrix puts it in policy.
Quick question?
Yeah.
Does that matrix then improve the consistency of the discipline that's imposed, or at least is proposed by management versus what stands review, what survives review and is not changed?
Certainly the former. Certainly as it relates to an administrative process of following up on investigation and determining what kind of discipline is appropriate, apart from any external review, that it does do that. But in agencies that have, and increasingly police departments around the country have more external review, that it makes it more consistently upheld or not there as well. We're also recommending that even though you've got some early intervention kinds of approaches or techniques in place, that we expand some of the things that they monitor, like sick time, and especially so that you could be on top of working with employees through employee assistance and counseling and other types of approaches to address problems that employees may be having early on in a problem rather than later on. Training, again, the department meets or exceeds state requirements, certainly, including changes mandated after the death of George Floyd and the protests that happened in 2020 that followed on from that. Everett requires additional training after promotion. Many agencies don't do that. And they're going farther to engage a number of people to help them provide training and procedural justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, and other concepts like that. And then building that capacity within the department so that people who receive that training can train others as well.
Question.
Yeah.
When do they train?
Yeah, well, that is difficult at current staffing levels, but they do it.
I mean, it's impressive.
And it's mostly on duty. So lastly, on equipment technology and fleet, you utilize most of the major police technology systems. We evaluated all of them. There's a long matrix that looks at each one of them and the extent to which the EPD has implemented them, body cameras, mobile reporting, things like that. There are a few gaps. In-car cameras helps by providing additional perspective, but also additional video to review. But it's an important thing that many agencies are doing to have that duplication of body cameras and in-car cameras. On fleet, we know you've got a fleet replacement policy, but we are urging you to have one that is fully funded, that isn't just on years, but also incorporates vehicle mileage and problems that individual vehicles have to adjust a vehicle replacement plan, and to fully fund it as much as possible. You've got a good fleet now, very few old vehicles in it. You know, the problem is when you buy a lot of vehicles in a couple of years, that a few years later, you all of a sudden have a big ticket to replace them. E-fleet is something that you are going to be faced with within a few years, and you should start planning now in how you're going to do that. And that's going to have to be a nimble policy because the transition from full gasoline to hybrid to electric vehicles will take some time and some planning, and the ability of electric vehicles to operate in a police environment will evolve with battery technology and things like that, and charging capacity. And that is the end of our presentation. So I appreciate you interrupting me and asking questions as we go along, and the help from the audience once. But I'd like to answer any other questions that you have.
Great. I'm going to go down the line because we've got a big presentation. I'll start with Councilmember Ryan.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation, for the update. Start at the end, I guess. +1 for an e-fleet. Thank you for mentioning that and bringing that up. I think that's a great way to just plan ahead and think ahead to being prepared for that. Let's see. I guess we'll just go backwards then. Thanks for also the mention about training and how Everett's been a leader, Everett Police Department's been a leader in training our folks, and that we were way ahead of the curve long before the murder of George Floyd. So I wanted to give kudos to Chief Templeman for his leadership on that. On the, I know what you're called matrix, there are plenty of matrices for us to go over, but on the matrix about staff recommendations, are those numbers in addition to our current staffing level, or in addition to our current funded positions? I know we have a number of vacancies right now.
They are new authorized positions that we are recommending.
Okay. And then maybe this is more of a Chief Templeman question, I guess, but is there a way to like reclass some of the vacancies to fill some of these identified needs in the meantime? Because I know we're struggling to get to that benchmark, and then there's the funding in addition to filling all of those vacancies. So if there's some of those vacancies could be reclassed to meet some of these identified needs, that'd be a suggestion I would just float out there. So that's more of a commentary, but just wanted to toss that on out there. Let's see. Yes for more COET. Yes for more COET teams. Thank you for that mention. And for the bike unit, I think that's a great way just to get around the city, and it reminds me that we need better bike lanes and lighting for cyclists as they're out, and better lighting in our alleyways, and just better mobility in general. And when we talk about the patrols in north and south, I was curious where that geographical line is determined between North Everett and South Everett.
You want to take that one from California?
Well, I'm gonna say, that was one of the areas that we had some difficulty in getting data that we wanted to present to you in terms of where calls occur and who's handling that call. And I think it's an indication of the, your current state of affairs in terms of staffing in patrol, that you've got a lot of cross-border responses, which creates a problem in us analyzing who is doing what. So it's mostly done on a citywide basis. Chief?
Yeah, the line is 41st Street for us, so, and that's a historical line that's been in place for 25-plus years. We do apply different staffing standards between north and south, and we do monitor call load. I think part of what we've done with some of the cops positions that were authorized for this year that we haven't been able to fill yet, and some additional staffing has moved those south of 41st Street to provide increased police staffing to respond to those calls for service south. But the line is 41st Street.
And I'm not sure what the demographic or the population makeup is, but I would assume that proportionally, North Everett has way fewer residents than South Everett, just based off of the shape of Everett. I think of it as like a ghost.
Yeah, it's probably accurate to say that, but one of the biggest factors, right, is looking at calls for service. So even if you may have fewer residents, we're really looking at that calls for service data and trying to deploy. And I think what we've seen over the last several years is an increase in calls for service south of 41st that did not exist 25 years ago. I can tell you 25 years ago, north of 41st was definitely had a higher call load, and but we're starting to see that shift now. And so that's why when we add positions, we've been adding them south of 41st.
Great, thank you. Just the last one, I have hesitations about adding more school resource officers, but that's a discussion for another time. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Vogely.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you for traveling here so that we can hear you and see you in person.
All right.
That was very helpful. Okay, so I like how Councilmember Ryan mentioned reclassing positions, and I know that part of that probably has to do with the EPOA and EPMA and negotiations and all of that, but if perchance, like COET, or even the forensic,
The forensic investigators?
thank you, investigators,
Yeah.
detectives. If we're able to relieve some of our officers from the types of calls that they get, would the amount of officers that we have now currently budgeted for be able to perform the proactive policing at the 40 to 45%, because I imagine that a lot of the calls for service are for, I think I wrote it down somewhere, so I didn't have to think about it. Public drug use, unhoused people, and perceived personal safety threats. And I imagine that COET goes to some of those, and, as many as they can, because that's, their thing. But that just regular patrol officers, their calls for service, and people want help, and they want it now. So I just imagine that if we may have an alternative, another opportunity to address the issue is to create an alternative response model, not staffed by police, which I know that there's been a little bit of talk, but I just see that as creating more opportunity for our law enforcement officers to do exactly what you have said would be great. They're already doing good work, but they don't have the amount of people to do it all. So I just wanted to put that out there and think that that's another thing that we could discuss as a council. And I really liked, and this is just a comment, that you mentioned the many laws that have been reformed in Washington State since, well, really since Initiative 940, De-escalate Washington. And before I was on council, you know, I was meeting with Chief about it before we knew each other, and we're doing a good job in Everett. So commendations abound. And it was very nice to see that that you guys are doing a great job, and you're better than the state laws that we have currently enacted. So I just wanted to put that out there. Fantastic, great job. We need what we have, and we'll get more. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Zarlingo.
Well, first, Mr. Brady, I'd like to thank you and Chief Templeman. I think it says a lot that a department that is successful and well-regarded is willing to look at itself and in an analytic way, look at the data and see what it can learn. I think in the current environment where our budgets are tight, and even when we have some budget, we can't always hire what we'd like, adding brain power and reviews, some independent reviews, are the best we can do, and that's a high standard. I'm glad to see that kind of work being done. And I also, I've been working through the full document. It's scores and scores and scores of pages. I think I'm about halfway through it, but I'd say from what I've seen so far, the presentation that you gave is a good summary, as good as I can imagine doing in this time. So thank you for that. And I guess I look forward to going through the rest of that, but I think I've got a good idea here of some things that we can do to keep improving, make the best of what we've got in manpower and in dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fosse.
I wanted to thank you for your presentation. I don't have too many questions because I kind of received some of this information earlier. But I am definitely on board, especially with the mentioning of the COIT, and kudos to our PD for even under a magnifying glass, you know, being shown as performing so well with your current restrictions of staffing levels. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Schwab.
Yes, thank you. A couple points in this study, and I don't think it was mentioned about employee relations. Was that part of the matrix study?
And under the management systems in terms of the human resource elements there, yes.
Okay, and I'm assuming it's going well because the rest of the department is working really well.
There's open lines of communication between labor and management, and it's not just set meetings, it's airing problems before they become big problems. I think they've got and that came out in the employee survey as well, because we did ask several questions about employee relations, and they got very high marks.
Good, thank you. Was the training requirements for response to active shooter as part of the requirements that the department meets?
I don't know the specifics, but I know that that's going to be part of any department's standard training program, yeah.
Okay. And I want to go back to the response to domestic violence events. Does the department have an advocacy representative? I mean, what kind of services do we provide for that here in the city? Thank you. Thanks, Chief.
Yeah, no, we do not.
Okay.
We have a billeted position in our major crimes investigations unit for a domestic violence detective. We've not eliminated that position. We've maintained that in our org chart. We just have not been able to fill that position. So that's something that as staffing improves and as we look at prioritization, that we would fill that position. But I will say that we, you know, on the domestic violence front, you know, we've got our own legal advisor now, just in the last year, and one of her primary responsibilities, she is the point of contact for extreme risk protection orders. And, you know, a lot of our cases there, not only domestic violence, but a lot of the cases that we pursue extreme risk protection orders in are related to domestic violence. And so those cases are highly scrutinized. And as many of you probably saw a couple months ago in the news story that was published locally, that Everett leads the entire county by 5-fold in the number of extreme risk protection orders that we apply for compared to the next agency behind us. So those are priority cases. We monitor domestic violence cases through our crime analysis unit, but again, with a more robust crime analysis unit, we'd be able to get access to even more data and more timely. But that is a priority for us and a commitment that we've not wavered on. We still have that position. We just need the body to put in there.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks a lot.
And I just had a few questions. First, I'm going to ask Council Vice President Chui could not be here this evening, but she did have a question that she wanted me to pose. She was wondering, had you done any analysis or comparisons of calls for service per capita in the city of Everett compared to the other jurisdictions? And we didn't see that in the report.
We did do a comparative survey, but we didn't ask the number of calls for service, and the reason is this, is that we can't validate the numbers for other agencies like we do for you. Many departments confuse officer-initiated activities with community-generated workloads, and so it makes it not very comparable. However, we've obviously worked with hundreds of police departments, and your call for service generation is where almost every, on a per capita basis, where almost every community in the country is.
Okay, so we're not higher.
You're not higher by
Okay,
any means.
'cause
In fact, you're at the
we always
lower
had
end.
some concern that maybe that we were.
Lower end of the range, in fact.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, so the data that you're using is from 2021, and I know that we were still, kind of in COVID then.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people locked down. So have you looked at any, first quarter of 2022 data to kind of test and see, are we on track? Do you feel like that was a good representative year?
It was tough enough getting 2021 data, and we got 2020 and 2019 data before that. So importantly, the 2019 data
Okay.
is good to show that 2021 is pretty close to being a pre-COVID kind of a year. You're right, the beginning of the year, it was still really bad, and then Omicron was coming in at the end of the year.
Yeah, then
But-
everybody got out of their
Yeah.
bubble and all sorts of things happen. Okay. These community liaison officers, the two that you're proposing, and I obviously haven't seen the job description, but it sounds like that would be mostly kind of community building type, almost, I want to say soft skills type of work. And I'm wondering, it looked like you were recommending sworn officers for that. Is that the kind of work that you could have, like civilians performing that work? Or is there some reason that we would want to use sworn officers for that work?
So you certainly could. The trends in other departments is in larger departments where you have a more robust community liaison presence or unit, you can break apart the various things that would be in that job description in terms for something that a sworn person could handle and is appropriate for versus what a civilian can handle. And some of those different tasks would be if you're supporting a community group in terms of telling them, reporting crime trends or the literature or some sort of liaison at a community event, a civilian can certainly handle that. But if you're trying to use these encounters as a way of partnering with them to solve problems, like whether it's drug use in a certain area or burglaries in a certain area where there's high-density housing, and working with patrol to develop a strategy to address things like that, you need a sworn person. So while we're only talking about one north and one south, you can't really do that very effectively.
Got it. That makes sense. And then the other question I was going to ask has to do with the proactive measures. And how you want to kind of make sure that your police officers are busy, and obviously we can see that they are, but when they start doing a lot more proactive work, are there measurement metrics that you keep track of for, how many incidents how many neighborhood meetings they're attending, or whatever those other things are?
Sure, and some of them are quantitative and some of them are really a process. So on the quantitative side, I think as we look at your police department right now, at your current proactivity level or lack thereof, when you look at the number of officer-initiated incidents, it's really very low as a proportion of calls for service. It's like 1/6 or something like that, or less. And we work with departments where they're equal numbers. But you don't want to just look at the numbers, because you can generate numbers in a proactive way in some undesirable ways. Like one department you could go to a strip mall and at 2 o'clock in the morning and say you did a check and that's one self-initiated activity, or you could say it's 10 different self-initiated activities. Or you can go out and do traffic tickets for an entire day. So it's maybe not the best way of looking at it. Supervisory control is what you want to look at, and a system of planning that proactive time and making people accountable for it. So that's one of the key roles of where crime analysis needs to work with field supervisors to help, and these community liaison staff, to be able to develop appropriate ways for officers to use their time to address a specific problem and to monitor their dedication of time to do that, like deploying in for an hour a shift in an area where there have been car burglaries, that type of thing.
Okay, that makes sense. And then my final, just maybe an observation is, I mean, obviously there's a lot of activities that you think we should start doing and enhance what we're doing there. And, you know, the budget reality is that we, first of all, can't even hire the officers we currently have, and you're recommending 9 more. What are the, did you look to see if there were any things that we should stop doing? I mean, I know that we, for example, we've had conversations internally about responding to calls of, you know, a bicycle theft where the crime is not in action. Somebody just got their bike stolen from their garage. Are there things that you would say we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, or was that just not part of the scope?
No, well, we looked at that, and we got much community input on that too, because some of that is actually happening right now, and some of the very minor things. So where you're staffed at right now, it's hard to take that look, because you're at that minimum, certainly during the half of the day that we identified as the problem. As you get closer to that 90, you can start, and we talk about this in the report, looking at some alternative strategies of using field civilians to handle some of that work. Community services officers, police service aides, variety of kinds of classifications around the country where they're handling nuisance abatement types of things, like the bicycle type of things like that a police officer doesn't need to do. It has a great impact. By taking away that workload, it creates proactive time for officers as well.
Yeah. So
but that would be something that would with the union, and because it would be reallocating workload to a different classification. It's
right.
a longer term strategy.
So I saw that in the report, but I didn't quite understand. So you think that what we should do first is staff up with these extra 9 people, and then after we have all those people hired, then we would start taking workload away. And
it's 5, not 9 on the sworn side. But no, it's getting from that 72 to 90, the people you're already authorized and funding.
Okay, yeah.
That's the critical gap.
Got it, okay. That makes sense. All right. That is all the questions. Thank you so much for being here and for all the work that you've done on our behalf. And Chief Templeman, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to close out a couple of hanging questions there for all of you. So starting with Councilmember Schwab about active shooter requirements. Just so you know, I'm not aware of any statewide active shooter requirements, but we have been training regularly for the last probably 10 years in active shooter, including this coming year. All of our officers will go through new active shooter training. So it's every couple of years that we're running our entire staff through that. Council President, to your comment about crime stats and looking at 2022, preliminary, almost every category is up, some double digits. And so we won't really know officially from the FBI until November of 2023 what our 2022 numbers look like. But we know internally, unofficially, that they're all increasing in every category. And then the last point about, hiring, staffing, and addressing calls for service. I don't want to miss opportunity to publicly state that those can go on together. We are looking at our calls for service and will be looking at, and there's a recommendation in the report that says that the agency should continue to look at ways to reduce call load for commissioned officers. That includes looking at, we've had these discussions before, should we be responding to every one of these calls? I just reviewed a citizen comment today that it took us 4 hours to get to a complaint, that it took 4 hours for us to get to a complaint where somebody had spray painted a fence. And it's unacceptable that it would take 4 hours for a police officer to respond to that. And so again, we're going to have to change that perspective from our community in terms of their expectations. And it starts with me sharing it publicly so everybody can hear it here today. And I didn't want to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, good.
So more to come on that
Yeah, thank
next
you.
year.
And thank you, Chief, to you and your staff and everybody who is participating in this. Lieutenant Fairchild, thank you for taking the lead on this. It's all good work and more to digest and think about as we move forward. So,
And if I could take the opportunity to thank everyone as well. Thank you
you.
for allowing us to work with you and your department. And this was a great department to work with. Not just Lieutenant Fairchild, as great as he was, but they made the whole process of accessibility and data very easy. And I think that unlike some agencies, they welcome this study and look at it as a way to build in analytical and objectivity capacity within the department. So I think it has long-term benefits for you.
yeah, we really appreciate that. It's
thank
nice
you.
to get that baseline. We have 2 more public hearings and briefings. The public hearing that we will open tonight on these 2 items, item 12 and 13, will remain open until the third and final reading, which will be on November 16th. So I'm going to read both of these into the record. And then we have Susie Haugen here. Item 12 is Council Bill 2211-44, first reading. Adopt an ordinance levying the regular property for the city of Everett for fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2023 on all taxable property, both real and personal, subject to taxation thereon, third and final reading, and the public hearing will be on November 16th. Item 13 is Council Bill 2211-45, first reading. Adopt an ordinance levying the EMS property taxes for the city of Everett for fiscal year commencing January 1st, 2023 on all taxable property, both real and personal, subject to taxation thereon, and the third and final reading and public hearing will also be on November 16th. Good evening, Susie. Sorry to have you waiting around, but you got to listen to all sorts of good stuff.
Quite all right. Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Today we have our property tax ordinance, the first reading of it. Before I get started on this presentation, I just want to take a moment to remind everybody of the rest of the budget process that lays before us. This is one of our last steps. We're nearing the finish line here. We have tonight's property tax ordinance first reading. Second reading will be on the 9th, and the third and final on the 16th of November. Then we have 3 budget hearings scheduled, one for November 16th, one for November 30th, and the final budget hearing on December 7th. And this will run concurrent with the budget ordinance readings, also on the 16th, 30th, and December 7th. So just a little review of that to remind everybody. So tonight, I'm going to start with 2 views of the 2022 property tax distribution by taxing district, and then I'll go over historical data on new construction and refund levies and provide a sample tax calculation for the average value home in Everett. And then I'll finish up by looking at how the purchasing power of property tax has declined over time as a result of the 1% limit on tax growth. So this pie chart shows the distribution of property taxes among the individual taxing authorities. It's an important reminder that when Everett property owners pay property taxes, all of that money does not come to the city. In fact, Everett only receives a minor portion. In order of magnitude from the bottom to the top, we have the port and the RTA that account for about 2% each. EMS at 5%, the county is 7%, Everett's regular levy is 19%, and the largest distribution by far goes to support our schools, which account for 65% of the total. To the right of the pie, you see a breakout for the schools, with 36% going to our local school districts and 29% to state schools. And for a slightly different perspective, here we show the distribution in terms of $1. So for each dollar of property tax paid by property owners, about 2 cents goes to the Regional Transit Authority, 2 cents to the Port of Everett, 5 cents goes to Emergency Medical Services, or EMS, 7 cents goes to Snohomish County, 19 cents goes to the City of Everett, and to fund basic services like police, fire, parks, library, and streets, and 65 cents is used by the state and local school district to support schools. So I-747 and the 1% limit on property tax, as you know, had a profound effect on the city's ability to fund core services. It was enacted by voters in 2001. It was originally invalidated by the Washington State Supreme Court, but ultimately enacted by the state legislature. I-747 limits the growth in property tax to 1% per year, plus amounts available from new construction, annexations, changes in state assessed properties, and refund levies. The 1% limit is the primary cause of the city's structural deficit, as 1% does not keep pace with the cost of delivering core services to our community. For 2023 taxes, the ordinance includes the 1% allowed by state law, plus new construction and a large refund levy. We don't have any annexations or changes in state assessed properties this year. On the next couple of slides, I'm going to go over some additional information on the history of new construction and refund levies. So this, no, that's okay. This chart shows the value of new construction that was added to the city's assessed value between 2009 and 2023. As you can see, it varies a lot from year to year, based on the level of activity, and of course, there is a time lag between when permits are issued, construction is underway, and when the value of those structures are added to our tax rolls. Construction activity overall was robust in 2016 and 2017. However, that outsized peak you see there is due in large to that composite wing facility and expansion for the 777X at Boeing, which together added about 25% of space to the factory out there. And although there's a lot of variability in construction, we do incorporate estimates in the 6-year forecast based on information we receive from our planning and permit services staff. This chart shows the history of refund levies going back to 2009. Refund levies do not represent increases to property tax revenue. They are a one-time restoration of levy amounts that the city was shorted in prior years due to refunds and exemptions that were submitted after the levies were finalized by the assessor. As you can see, refund levy amounts are all over the place, and they really present no discernible trend. We've had years with no refund levies and years with refund levies greater than $400,000, and for that reason, we do not incorporate assumptions for future refund levies in the 6-year forecast. There is just no basis to be able to do that. So now we'll take a look at what this all means for the owner of an average residential property in Everett. We start in the first column with the average assessed value of a residential property in Everett using numbers provided in the Snohomish County Assessor's 2022 annual report. Although you see much larger numbers for Everett's median value on real estate websites, I'm using the assessor's numbers for this purpose because they relate directly to one's property tax assessments. The average residential value for 2022 taxes, according to the assessor's report, is $424,000. If we apply the city's average assessed value increase for 2023 taxes of 19.6%, the value of this property grows from $424,000 to $507,000 for 2023. Because the assessed value is growing at a rate greater than the growth in property tax revenue, the regular levy rate is reduced from $1.78 in 2022 to $1.51 in 2023, and the EMS levy rate is reduced from 44 cents in 2022 to 37 cents in 2023. Looking at the bottom section of this table, you can see the net result is that even though the property owner's assessed value rises by 19.6%, the 2023 tax bill for the regular and EMS levies only increase by $16.52, or roughly 1.8% over what was paid in 2022. And the reason why the increase is greater than 1% is due to new construction being added to the tax rolls and a very large, probably the largest refund levy we've ever had. And just as a reminder, this analysis, these numbers, are just for a portion of a taxpayer's bill, just Everett's regular levy and the EMS levy. This does not include any impact for what's happening with the school levies, county, RTA, et cetera. You know, and we've discussed the 1% limit on property taxes and how that poses significant challenges on the city's ability to keep pace with the rising cost of public services. This chart illustrates the diverging paths of the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and the 1% limit on property taxes, beginning in 2001, when the 1% limit was enacted, and ending and extending out to 2022. So, you know, although CPI is not a perfect measure of inflation or the external forces that drive the growth of the cost of the city providing public services, it is relevant to our labor contracts and many of our contracts with external vendors. Industry-specific areas that significantly exceed CPI include construction costs relating to maintaining the city's infrastructure, as well as healthcare and the cost of technology, as a couple more examples. So looking at the chart, if we start with $1 in 2001 as the base year, and then we deflate that dollar by the difference between CPI and the 1% growth limit, by 2022, the value of that dollar in terms of how much we can buy with it declines to only 60 cents. And that concludes my presentation for this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do any council members have questions for Susie tonight? Councilmember Zarlingo.
Well, I did some calculations myself a while back and came up with numbers on what I thought might be a typical house of the 1% numbers, and came up with something like $11 additional. So I guess it's a bit surprising, but also, I guess, reassuring that maybe I wasn't too far out. $11 doesn't go real far in the current environment, but thank you for a clear presentation of the kind of situation we're in. I appreciate that even when the news is not good.
Thank you. Any Councilmember Boakley, do you have a comment?
I was looking up the profits of certain companies, and it would seem that we might need to tax some companies rather than just the people. Oh, that's something that nobody wants to hear, but, you know, that's just, I'm putting that out there. Maybe another tax revenue for, you know, people profiting over $502 billion a year. That's all.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm very thankful that you're emphasizing that the portion of the taxes that our community is paying is for the city is very, very small compared to the other taxing districts. I guess this is more of a comment. I really do think that message needs to be continued in our community and in perhaps our website. All the other needs of our community are definitely need to be funded also, but it seems like a citizen or a community member gets a very good deal when you're talking about all the things that we provide for $23 per thousand. So anyway, so I want to continue to emphasize that message. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ryan.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to echo what Councilmember Schwab just shared. I think it's critical and for transparency's sake and for public trust, so that the public knows like what their tax dollar is going towards. And folks see inflation and everything else that's happening right now. So having like infographics and just very clear ways of having your very clear presentation to us be put into ways and intentional outreach to the community, so that they're also seeing just that they're getting a pretty good bang for their buck when they do pay their property tax bills. And so I also wanted to say that I appreciate the mention about the levy lid, and just wanted to make a verbal mention that I do believe that we are past due to ask our voters to raise the levy lid lift. So I just wanted to float that on out to the universe. So thank you, Susie, for your presentation today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Susie, thank you. We will see this for final reading on later this month. In the meantime, we have no additional questions on the briefing items and no further business or executive session. So we will adjourn.